Welcome to the World War II newspaper channel where we read the Chicago Tribune one day at a time, going through World War II as it happened through the eyes of those who lived it. If you enjoy content like this, please subscribe to this channel and click on the bell icon to get notifications when a new upload is going to premiere. And also, if you want to hear the actual newsmakers, go check out my other channel, the companion channel to this one, the World War II Old Time Radio channel. There we have vintage broadcasts, including newscasts, speeches, old movies, and music. And subscribe to that channel and click on the bell icon. Now for the newspaper. News as read from the Chicago Tribune for Saturday, January 25th, 1941. Henry Chop reporting. The weather today. The sun rose at 7:09 a.m. It set at 4:56 p.m. For Chicago and vicinity, cloudy Saturday with light snow probable. Much colder late Saturday, cold wave at night and on Sunday with light snow Sunday. Gentle variable winds becoming fresh north and northwest late Saturday. The low temperature 23 degrees. The high temperature 29. Today's headline, Green fires 545 payrollers. Springfield, Illinois, January 24th. Governor Dwight H. Green's Republican Economy Acts fell twice late today with these results. Number one, a total of 545 employees were swept from the payroll of the Department of Public Works and Buildings, and Green announced that 347 of the jobs held by the discarded workers had been abolished as unnecessary. Posts here to throw, filled by the remaining 198, will be restaffed when and if they are needed. This mass severance brought to almost 1,000 the number of Democrats purged from the rolls since the governor took office last week, more than 400 others having been fired in previous orders. Number two, because contracts had been awarded without compliance with the legal provision requiring competitive bids, the governor ordered repair and work stopped at 7 state institutions. He took this action when he learned that these and other contracts made by Democratic administrations in recent years had not followed the letter of the law. It was forecast that additional stoppages will shortly be ordered. About $850,000 is involved in the contracts affected today, most of these having been awarded during the brief administration of Green's Democratic predecessor, Governor John Stell. And now for world news. Cairo, Egypt, January 24th. Marshal Rodolfo Graziani, commander of Italy's army in Libya, was reported tonight to have abandoned his headquarters at Sirte, 50 miles west of Derna, apparently under heavy bombardment by British airmen. With two-thirds of his effectives and much of his equipment lost in the Egyptian-Libyan campaign to date, Marshal Graziani quit Sirte for a spot more difficult for RAF bombers to find, the British said. For 2 days now, British motorized units and airmen have been ranging about beyond Derna, 95 miles west of captured Tobruk, where about 20,000 Italians were seized. With strong aviation support, British land forces pushed steadily toward Derna, which is now said to be almost an undefended town. British and Australian patrols were reported west and south of Derna, which was heavily bombed yesterday, as were the Italian air bases of Apollonia and Maraiua farther to the west. Aided by Haile Selassie, the dethroned Lion of Judah, now back on his native Ethiopian soil, the British also reported new blows against the Italians, both inside and around Ethiopia. To the north of the fascist-conquered kingdom, said reports reaching Cairo, the British have pushed more than 80 miles into the Italian colony of Eritrea, where they were said to have resumed pursuit of nearly 2 full Italian divisions routed from Kassala a week ago. The Italians, the British said, had abandoned the outposts of Kairu and Eukata. In a Kenya colony, which borders both southern Ethiopia and Italian Somaliland, today's war bulletin said vigorous patrol activity had reached across a large portion of the frontier, but that few of the enemy were encountered. Casualties were reported inflicted on the Italians in Ethiopia itself by Ethiopian patriots on the warpath south and east of Lake Tana in the northwestern corner of the country. Athens, January 24th. The famous Italian Wolves of Tuscany division has suffered such heavy losses on the central Albanian battlefield north of Klissura, it has been withdrawn and a new commander appointed to reorganize it, Greek reports from the front said tonight. Other Italian troops also were reported withdrawing in that sector to freshly prepared fortifications. A government spokesman said this withdrawal resulted from Greek occupation of new heights overlooking the fascist lines. We have taken 530 prisoners in 2 days, the spokesman said. The Tuscany division was thrown into battle recently after a hurried trip from Italy in an attempt to stem the Greek advance, it was said. Information gained from Italian prisoners said that at least 7 Italian divisions have had to be withdrawn for reorganization because of extremely heavy losses, the Greek said. A growing number of officers among those captured by the Greeks was noted. In one group of 25 prisoners, there were 8 officers, it was said. Greek bombers again raided Berat and Elbasan communication centers for the Italian forces in the central and northern sectors, dispatches from the front said. A supply column was reported machine-gunned. Rome, January 24th. The Italian High Command reported today that prisoners and automatic arms were captured in patrol actions against Greeks in Albania. The High Command also announced that British warplanes had bombed the picturesque island of Rhodes, site of one of Italy's mightiest naval and air bases in the eastern Mediterranean. The attack on Rhodes, which still bears many evidences of occupation by crusading knights in the medieval ages, was said to have been carried out Wednesday night and was said to have caused slight damage to private dwellings, but no casualties. Rome, January 24th. The Italian War Communique today said British warplanes had carried out bombing attacks on the Libyan base of Derna and that Italian planes had machine-gunned British mechanized forces in the Tobruk zone. The German Air Corps, meanwhile, carried out another bombing attack on the British naval base at Malta in the central Mediterranean, the High Command declared. London, January 24th. The Admiralty announced today the British submarine Parthenon had sunk a 7,000-ton Italian supply ship south of Italy. Valletta, Malta, January 24th. British bombers this afternoon heavily raided Italian bases in Sicily, from which German bombers also have been operating against the British Mediterranean fleet. The glare of fires apparently started by incendiary bombs could be seen from Malta, which is some 60 miles from Sicily. New Delhi, India, January 24th. Arrangements have been made to accommodate 38,000 Italian prisoners of war in India, it was announced here today. Bucharest, Romania, January 24th. Passed by military censor. Romanian troops were sent out tonight to hunt for Horia Sima, the powerful leader of the pro-Nazi Iron Guard, and every last cutthroat involved with him in the Guard's bloody 4-day rebellion. Sima is vice premier of Romania. A communique blaming Sima for the outbreak likewise announced that any Romanian withholding knowledge of his hiding place and those of other originators and executors of the revolt would be treated as an accomplice and made to suffer the full penalties of the law. A dispatch from Sofia, Bulgaria said Sima was believed to be hiding in Brasov in the Transylvanian Alps, 75 miles north of Bucharest. General Ion Antonescu, the chief of state whose authoritarian regime now apparently has weathered the greatest crisis it yet has faced, described the rebels still holding out as under communist influence. He has promised a reorganization of the Iron Guard and a government which would include sincere guardsmen. Tanks of the German and Romanian armies patrolled Bucharest streets, which were filled with glass and broken masonry and the rubble left by heavy fighting. German fighter planes occasionally swooped low over the city. Many Jews were reported slain in basement executions in their homes. Iron Guardists took over the home of Magda Lapescu, the red-haired woman friend of the deposed King Carol, who now is in exile with him in Spain. During the height of the fighting, the home of the first Secretary of the United States Legation, J. Webb Benton of Fort Myer, Virginia, was twice invaded by troops and then by civilians who used it as a fortress from which they shot at the soldiers. The Romanian army later provided protection, stationed a tank in the yard. All Americans, including Benton and his mother, were reported safe. The public was warned to buy no jewelry or furniture or anything else from secondhand stores. All of it, the government said, might be loot from homes. All persons arrested must go before military courts. They must be tried within 24 hours of apprehension, and punishments must be carried out within the succeeding 10 hours. Looters or snipers firing from houses on military men, citizens, or public buildings were put under what amounted to an instant sentence of death. It was announced that they could be executed on the spot. State employees not immediately reporting for work were made subject to discharge. Army generals were put in charge of the secret police. The Bucharest police took over the gas and electric companies, and all public gatherings were outlawed. The situation in the provinces remained in doubt, particularly in such cities as Brasov, Gheorghiu, Constanta, Ploiești, Cantina, and Craiova, all of which the Iron Guardists had claimed to have occupied completely. Army headquarters asserted, however, that order was being restored rapidly in those areas. The number of dead and wounded was unknown, but in Bucharest alone, the hospitals were filled with wounded, and partial lists of the dead were posted outside. This was the first day since Sunday that had not been filled with the din of revolver, rifle, and machine gun and artillery fire, although yesterday's action was largely a case of mopping up and driving Guardists out of snipers' nests and public buildings. Sima called on his followers to surrender at 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon after 3 radio appeals by Antonescu, in which he had stressed that he was a friend of the Axis and no tool of Jews and Masons. Bangkok, Thailand, January 24th. The High Command today announced that the Thailand Air Force had carried out widespread air raids on the Cambodia border area of French Indochina in retaliation for new French air attacks on Thai towns. London, January 24th. British officials and editorial writers gave the silent treatment today to Colonel Charles A. Lindbergh's testimony yesterday before the House Foreign Affairs Committee in Washington, D.C. Unofficially, it was said that Lindbergh still is a name to conjure with in America, and his testimony undoubtedly was the most effective of the Lend-Lease bill opponents. Lindbergh's testimony was played up in the morning papers, but there was no accompanying comment. Berlin, January 24th. Hats off to Charles Lindbergh for the courage shown, was the reaction of authorized German sources today to the American airman's testimony before the House Foreign Affairs Committee yesterday. In view of the moral terrorism exerted by interventionists, this courage shown is exemplary, they said. Madrid, January 24th. Britain aided Spain in meeting an acute wheat shortage today by agreeing to permit 65,000 tons of grain previously acquired by Britain to go to Spain through the naval blockade. Spain will receive 50,000 tons of Argentine wheat under a second agreement signed today and 15,000 tons of Canadian wheat under the initial cession. London, January 24th. An official announcement tonight said a United States delegation had arrived in the United Kingdom to discuss problems of administration and jurisdiction arising from the original agreement to lease Western Hemisphere bases for American destroyers. Vichy, France, January 24th. France's 20th century revolution added another piece of temporary furniture to its equipment today with the selection of a national council, a consultative body of 188 eminent persons from all sections of French life, which will enable Marshal Henri Philippe Pétain to keep his finger on the pulse of the nation. All members of the council, which will have no legislative power and will be subject to summons by the chief of state, were chosen or approved by the Marshal. It is hoped that the council will enable the Vichy government more effectively carry out Pétain's primary purpose, the preservation of the unity of the French nation. Members of the council have been chosen from all sections of the country's life and from both sides of the line of demarcation. It includes 69 senators and deputies and lacks only those conspicuously associated with the old regime, which lost the war. The decree setting up the council specified that it will last only until a new French constitution has been promulgated. In selecting the council, Pétain summoned many high personalities to Vichy. Some made the grade and some did not. Edouard Herriot, former premier, was summoned but was not named to the council. In the political sphere are Jacques Desroches, extreme rightist and enemy of England, former Foreign Minister Georges Bonnet, André François Poncet, former ambassador to Germany, and Colonel Charles de la Roque, head of the fascist-like former Croix de Feu. Berlin, January 24th. The magazine Berlin, Rome, Tokyo, which usually and accurately reflects German Foreign Office views, declared today that the signatories of the Three-Power Pact would carry out their agreement to the fullest extent against any aggression. An article written by Karl Megerle, a journalist who enjoys the confidence of Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, charged that President Roosevelt had misinterpreted the pact by ascribing to it aggressive intentions by Germany, Italy, and Japan. The article asserted that the real effort at domination of the world comes from the democracies and added, but the world is not and will not be Anglo-Saxon. Belgrade, Yugoslavia, January 24th. Colonel William J. Donovan in Europe on a mission from the United States said today that he planned to visit the Albanian front during his stay in Greece. He concluded the official part of his visit to this Yugoslav capital today with calls upon the chiefs of the nation's armed forces. He said he would leave tomorrow for Athens. Budapest, Hungary, January 24th. Direct telegraph communications with Russia were open today for the first time since Tsar Nicholas II declared war on the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1914. Dublin, Ireland, January 24th. Due to the spread of an epidemic of hoof and mouth disease, the export of cattle to Britain has been suspended. Britain has been receiving 2,500 cattle a week. British areas which are dependent on Irish cattle will be put on short meat rations. The latest outbreak of the hoof and mouth disease occurred in Abbeyleix, Queens County, where more than 100 animals were slaughtered. Here to throw, the epidemic was confined to the northern counties. Its extension to the south caused apprehension because more cattle are fattened there for export purposes. Irish farmers who have cattle ready for export will suffer because they must continue to feed their stock until the embargo is lifted. Tokyo, Japan, January 24th. The Thai government at Bangkok has accepted the offer of the Japanese government to mediate the undeclared border warfare between the Thai and French Indochina, and the conferences will begin here soon, the Cabinet Information Bureau announced today. The Vichy government previously accepted Japan's offer. The Thai government is seeking sections of Laos and Cambodia provinces, Indochina, which she claims were taken from her by France. Lisbon, Portugal, January 24th. Wendell L. Willkie en route to London arrived here today by Pan American Clipper. Reiterating that he expected to remain in England about a fortnight, he said that he hoped to be back in the United States by February 12th. A newspaperman remarked that he had lost money in betting on the recent American presidential election, and Wilkie, the defeated Republican candidate, retorted, "Well, I lost a job." There were 8 other passengers aboard the Yankee Clipper. London, January 24th. Lady Diana Denise Hay, now 15 years old today, became the holder of the ancient title of Lord High Constable of Scotland upon the death of her father, Jocelyn Victor Hay, Earl of Errol, in an automobile accident in Nairobi, Kenya colony, Africa. He was 35 years old and had succeeded to both titles in 1928 on the death of his father. Only once has a woman held the constable's title, which was granted by Robert Bruce in 1314. That was in 1717 when Charles, a bachelor and the 13th Earl, was succeeded by his sister May as Countess. Lady Diana now becomes the Countess of Errol. The Earl's secondary and newer title of Baron Kilmarnock, created in 1831 and carrying a seat in the House of Lords, goes to his brother Gilbert Hay, an artillery lieutenant. Madrid, Spain, January 24th. Incensed by a report that the Vichy France government has permitted 150 Spaniards, including Niceto Alcala Zamora, first president of the Republic, to leave for South America, the Falange Organ Arriba today warned that Spain may intercept the ship. According to Spanish papers, the 10,000-ton French ship Alcina left Marseilles for South America with about 1,000 refugees. Arriba expressed annoyance because Jews were aboard, saying they were going to an easy life and a soft climate instead of to the penal colonies of French Guiana. As a question of Spanish honor, the paper said it was interested in the assassins that France is turning loose. Arriba said most of the names of those aboard the Alcina would be found in the files of the Spanish police. Hamilton, Bermuda, January 24th. A bill exempting from customs payments certain machinery, materials, and supplies necessary for the construction and use of the United States bases passed the Legislative Council today with little debate. Several members who said that building materials should be taxable did not press the point when it was explained that the bill's duration was limited to 3 months and that the United States is anxious to push ahead with the work. Emphasizing the need for quick action, Colonial Secretary Major Dutton said the United States government is most anxious to get on with this work. He added it was fully realized by the drafters of the bill that there may be some aspects which are not entirely satisfactory, but that the matter was linked with issues which lie outside these islands. Washington, D.C., January 24th. Viscount Halifax, new British ambassador appointed to succeed the late Lord Lothian, arrived in this country tonight after a secret crossing of the Atlantic aboard the new British battleship George V. The member of the British War Cabinet earlier had received the personal welcome of President Roosevelt in a precedent-shattering meeting aboard the presidential yacht Potomac 6 miles out on the fog-blanketed waters of Chesapeake Bay off the United States Naval Academy, Annapolis, Maryland. The envoy issued a statement in which he said the British people are united as never before, and I have no doubt that with your help we shall win. Lord and Lady Halifax completed their journey aboard the Potomac, leaving the big man-of-war anchored in the bay out of sight of shore. They set foot on American shores after dark at the Academy Wharf in the eerie light of flashbulbs, spotlights, and ship flares. From there, they were whisked in the president's car over 35 miles of winding, slippery road to Washington and delivered at the door of the British Embassy by the chief executive on his way to the White House. Before entering the stately mansion, the new ambassador posed patiently for news photographers. He is tall, with aquiline features and thin sandy hair. Lady Halifax, several inches shorter, was dressed entirely in black and carried a muff into which both hands were thrust. She smiled into the cameras as the cold rain swept down around the portico. Onlookers were startled when they saw a wartime helmet and a gas mask under the arm of one of Lord Halifax's secretaries. It was explained that these articles were being kept handy for a possible hurried return trip to England. Havana, Cuba, January 24th. Much indignation was expressed today over a bill introduced yesterday in the United States Senate by Senator William H. Smathers, Democrat, New Jersey, under which Cuba would be admitted as another state of the American Union. Editorial and radio comments depicted the United States as the everlasting powerful octopus of the North, always ready to crush and absorb Cuba at its first opportunity. President Fulgencio Bautista, however, refused to comment. Some editorials recommended that he slow up the pace of his recent promise that Cuba would unconditionally cooperate with the United States should that country participate in the present European war. Senator Baruch Mendieta said he would urge an extraordinary session of the Cuban Congress be called to adopt a resolution against the proposal. Mendieta declared that the resolution will be in accordance with the grave insult that Senator Smathers has bestowed on Cuba. London, January 24th. Historic silver communion plate, which church officials regard as priceless, some of which dates back 250 years, has been stolen from St. Paul's German Reformed Church in the East End. It was disclosed today. The church suffered badly from raids last autumn and again when London was attacked recently by firebombs. No services have been held in the church since last September, and during the interim, looters found the safe and took its whole contents. The communion plate included a silver dish dated 1691, a silver cup of 1697, two silver flagons of 1701 and 1739, a silver cover of 1767, and a silver jug of 1881. London, January 24th. Professor J.B.S. Haldane, chairman of the editorial board of the banned communist newspaper Daily Worker, announced today a campaign will be launched shortly against the paper's suppression by the government under the wartime emergency defense regulations. The campaign, he said, will be conducted in factories and workshops. William Rust, editor of the paper, said an application will be made to a high court for release for sale of the printing plant seized by the police. Debenture holders, he said, would benefit from the sale. He put the circulation of the Daily Worker at 60,000 copies daily and 120,000 copies on weekends. London, January 24th. Great Britain revitalized today the on-again, off-again drive to make her citizens gas-conscious, and it was disclosed that the millions of men in the armed services had stepped up sharply their preparations designed to repel any Axis invasion attempt this spring. During the Munich crisis in September 1938, 45 million of gas masks were distributed, but now only a fifth of the population carries them. To require others to do so, there were suggestions that a mask must be shown to obtain entry into an air raid shelter. The Ministry of Home Security also was reported to have under consideration a plan for civilian gas alarm practices similar to those which the armed forces have been put through. Apparently, the government believes that vast additional quantities of gas fighting equipment may be needed because it was reported that manufacturers of such equipment have been asked to speed up their operations, working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Conjectures continued, meanwhile, about Axis invasion plans and how Adolf Hitler would try to land his forces on the islands. Some believe that in addition to a possible attempt to send hundreds of thousands of his troops across the North Sea and the English Channel in boats and barges, he might try to drop shock troops from trains and gliders towed by planes. All observers seem to be convinced that the Axis effort would be the greatest assault ever launched. London had its fifth straight raidless night tonight. There were no reports of German planes over any part of the Isles. Bad flying weather apparently was responsible. The English Channel was shrouded with dense fog, and there were occasional showers. The weather also prevented Royal Air Force operations against Germany, it was reported. London, January 24th. The Cheshire Cheese, once the favorite eating place of Dr. Samuel Johnson, more recently a mecca for American tourists, was destroyed by fire yesterday. The cause of the blaze was undetermined. Most of the relics which adorned the famous Old Inn on Fleet Street, London's Newspaper Row, were reported saved. The first establishment bearing the name was wiped out in the Great London Fire of 1666. Its successor had been damaged in the Great German Fire Raid December 29th on the city, London's financial district. London, January 24th. London doctors and hospital matrons today defended Sir Archibald Home, County Director of the Suffolk Red Cross, who yesterday objected to the use of lipstick by Mrs. C.D. Fellows, attractive assistant commandant of a hospital in his area. The ban on lipstick for nurses in uniform is not the result of narrow-mindedness, but of the necessity that nurses be as clean as possible and not use anything that might prove to be a germ carrier, hospital authorities said. Smith Falls, Ontario, January 24th. 2 German prisoners of war escaped from a train carrying them to an internment camp today, shortly after police recaptured a Nazi pilot who had gotten away in another dash for freedom. Ottman Holman, 25-year-old pilot, jumped through the window of the train but was recaptured a few minutes later. I am an officer, and it is the duty of a German officer to escape if he can, said Lieutenant Holman. He had survived 52 hours in a collapsible boat after his plane was shot down off the coast of Scotland. Ogdensburg, New York, January 24th. Baron Franz Wehr, 26 years old, a captured Nazi flyer who said he had escaped from a Canadian train carrying German prisoners to an internment camp, was in police custody tonight after paddling a small boat across the St. Lawrence River using his hands as oars. Berlin, January 24th. A DNB German official news agency dispatch from Posen today said a special court had imposed death sentences of 13 of 22 Poles accused of murdering German nationals in September 1939, the month of the German invasion. Several were said to have confessed, the agency said. DNB said the Poles were members of the Obrona Narodowa, an organization of militia character. They were accused of killing 36 men and women at the beginning of the war. Berlin, January 24th. The Ministry of Justice tonight proclaimed a regulation providing the death penalty for extreme cases of war profiteering. The courts were given sweeping powers to combat price raising deemed to be unwarranted. The Swiss franc yesterday rose 0.06 cent to $23.28 United States cent, 23.28 United States cents in the foreign exchange market, reaching the highest point since late 1937. Foreign exchange dealers said the rise apparently came as the result of a flow of frightened money to the neutral nation. The Canadian dollar, after a substantial gain Thursday, dropped 0.3 cents. Santiago, Chile, January 24th. The newspaper Imparcial tonight reported that official circles emphatically denied rumors that General Carlos Ibanez, former president of Chile, had been arrested in Argentina and taken to Buenos Aires on a petition of the Chilean government. General Ibanez fled to Argentina 2 years ago when a revolutionary movement designed to establish him as president was discovered. London, January 24th. Professor Arthur Lloyd James, linguistic expert and father of the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation, Ascent, today was committed for trial at Old Bailey Court on the charge of murdering his wife at their home on January 14th. The professor pleaded not guilty. It was indicated his defense will be mental illness. Witnesses testified that Lloyd James, who is 56 years old, and his wife, who was 48, were very happy. One could almost say ideally so. The defendant was said to have told the police he had committed the crime so his wife would die happy. He is alleged to have killed her with a hammer and fork. A letter written by the slain woman was introduced into the testimony. It was written on the day before the murder. The letter said, "Yesterday I went to fetch Arthur from a nursing home. He definitely is better and does not talk so much about himself and his troubles, but he cannot concentrate on anything yet. He does not want to write or read." And now for national news. Washington, D.C., January 24th. The Roosevelt administration today clamped down on a lid of secrecy on the testimony of high-ranking Army, Navy, and Aviation Corps officials before the House Foreign Affairs Committee considering the president's war dictatorship bill. The action was taken in the apparent fear that the witnesses would be forced to admit that Colonel Charles A. Lindbergh, former Assistant Secretary of War, Hanford McNider, and General Hugh S. Johnson were correct when they asserted that the United States would be in no danger of invasion if Great Britain fell. Previously, cabinet officials had led a fear campaign by picturing an early German invasion if Congress did not surrender its war-making and spending powers to Mr. Roosevelt in order that England might have unlimited aid. General George C. Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, Admiral Harold R. Stark, Chief of Naval Operations, and Major General George Brett, Acting Chief of the Air Corps, were to have appeared at an open hearing. They had stated their willingness to testify in public, but the Democratic majority of the committee, evidently operating under orders, suddenly imposed what was termed by Representative Hamilton Fish, Republican New York, the most outrageous gag rule in his 20 years' experience in Congress. Tempers flared and heated words were exchanged by Fish and Chairman Saul Bloom, Democrat New York, but the majority insisted that the three officials be heard in executive session. Bloom later announced that this secret session would be held next Monday. The open hearing proceeded today with William R. Castle, former Undersecretary of State and former United States Ambassador to Japan, denouncing the president's measure as clearly a war measure. Castle spoke as a representative of the America First Committee. In the year 1776, remarked Castle, the Declaration of Independence led to war. Is Bill 1776, which may sometime be called our renunciation of independence, also going to lead us into war? The committee met as usual at 10 o'clock this morning. The minority members expecting Admiral Stark and Generals Marshall and Brett to be present. Representative Luther A. Johnson, Democrat Texas, suddenly moved that the committee close its doors to the public. So ordered, said Bloom. Minority members, bewildered, protested, and inquired what was going on. It was then learned that Chairman Bloom had called the three officers and told them they had not been invited by the committee but merely by Fish, and that they ought to insist upon being heard in secret session only. About this moment, Fish received a letter from General Marshall by messenger. Marshall wrote that he had been informed by Bloom that his presence had not been requested by the committee. Only the previous evening, Bloom had announced the names of the three witnesses, and none of the majority members had objected. Evidently, Mr. Bloom heard from the higher-ups, commented Fish. I denied that, yelled Bloom. I talked to no one, not to the President or the Secretary of State or anyone. Washington, D.C., January 24th. The contention that prices of scrap and secondary zinc were unduly high was advanced today by the Defense Commission after a conference with representatives of the industry. Leon Henderson, Defense Commissioner in charge of price stabilization, said the group agreed to submit a report in a few days on how requirements of customers may be adequately met during the national defense preparation. Although the price of primary zinc has remained at $7.25 a pound at East St. Louis for the last 4 months, some producers of secondary zinc have recently been charging premiums above the price, the commission said. At the same time, the price of zinc scrap, source of the secondary zinc, has jumped sharply. It is clear that the actual tonnage of metal which has been sold above the base price is very small compared to the total sales of primary and secondary zinc. Nevertheless, the sales are undoubtedly an unsettling influence on the market. Boston, Massachusetts, January 24th. Possibility of establishing a permanent women's unit for aerial defense work on a voluntary basis was seen today by Army officials as the Air Defense Command completed 4-day maneuvers in New England. A blinding snowstorm halted maneuvers earlier than scheduled, but officers said they had won 35 theoretical victories out of a possible 50 over enemy bombers. Praising the work of 180 women who worked at the Boston Information Center of the maneuvers, handling and evaluating information telephoned by 10,000 civilian spotters and 700 observation posts, Captain Thomas J. Cody, the center's commanding officer, said the maneuvers proved most definitely that women can do this work and do it efficiently. He declared Major General James E. Cheney, commander of aircraft warning maneuvers for New England areas during the tests, expressed hope that the women will see fit to remain subject to call in the event of an emergency. Washington, D.C., January 24th. Captain Harold C. Train has been designated Chief of Staff to the Commander of the Battle Force, the Navy Department announced today, and will be succeeded as Commander of the USS Arizona by Captain Franklin Van Valkenburg. Train was born in Kansas City, Missouri in 1887 and was a member of the American delegation to the London Naval Conference in 1930. Van Valkenburg, who has been Inspector of Naval Material for the New York District, is a native of Minneapolis. Captain Ellis S. Stone, naval attaché at the embassy in Paris until last April, was named to command the USS Brooklyn. Captain Charles Horatio McNorris of Wetumpka, Alabama, was ordered to duty on the staff of the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet. He will be succeeded by Commander L.D. McCormick of San Diego, California, at present on the staff of the Commander of the Battle Force. New York, January 24th. 9 Army pursuit planes returning to Mitchell Field, New York from the Air Defense Command exercises today were forced down by snow at Suffolk Field, about 50 miles away, and the pilots asked for transportation to Mitchell Field. On one of New York's wintriest evenings, the following teletype exchanges took place. Suffolk, please send transportation for 9 pilots, staff cars with heaters preferred. Mitchell, transportation for Suffolk departing Mitchell for 30. No cars available, have to send 2-ton truck, post guard on airplanes. Suffolk, if you're joking, it isn't funny. Truck insult, request suitable transportation. Mitchell, not enough rank in your detachment if total and compounded to even sit in a staff car. Upon your return, heating facilities will be placed at your disposal. The truck was dispatched. The pursuit pilots are lieutenants. Washington, D.C., January 24th. Senator Scott W. Lucas, Democrat, Illinois, said today the War Department had informed him it would erect a hospital and infirmary in one barracks at Scott Field, Illinois, at a total estimated cost of $450,000. The department said the hospital would be of 295 bed capacity and of the cantonment type intended to relieve crowding in the present facilities. Washington, D.C., January 24th. Far-reaching changes in administrative procedure were recommended today in a voluminous report finally made by a special committee appointed 2 years ago at the direction of President Roosevelt. The committee was highly critical of some current practices and proposed the separation of the judicial and prosecutive functions of federal agencies. However, a majority of the committee opposed any extension of court reviews of agency decisions as was provided for in the Walter Logan bill. It was recalled that the committee was set up to offset the pressure for adoption of that bill, which was designed to curb New Deal bureaucracy. Whenever renewed demands were made for passage of the bill, the administration always replied that it had a committee working on the subject and that definite action must await completion of the study. It was considered significant that the report was not made until after the president had an excuse to veto the Walter Logan bill after it had been passed at the last session of Congress. The committee's study of administrative practices embraced 33 agencies and departments, among them the Power Commission, Trade Commission, and Labor Board. Its report made these overall recommendations. Number 1, Creation of an Office of Federal Administrative Procedure to review the procedures and practices of administrative agencies. This would be composed of a director appointed by the President and Associate Justice of the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia and the Director of the Administrative Office for the United States Courts. Number 2, separation of judicial and prosecutive functions by creating a new corps of officers to be known as the hearing commissioners. They would function much as trial judges with appeal from their decisions being to the agency. They would operate a separate unit entirely divorced from any investigative or prosecutive activities. Number 3, some standardization of the procedure for issuance of rules and regulations, giving persons affected by them greater opportunity to participate in drafting the rules. In general, new rules would not be effective until 45 days after publication. Number 4, simplification of the administrative procedures by extending the use of conferences and other informal methods to secure controversies. The committee condemned protracted and expensive hearings. Number 5, the committee found that there was inadequate provision for court review of agency decisions both on the law and the facts, and that any extension of court review would result in needless litigation and would place an undue and improper burden upon the courts. It opposed creation of special administrative courts. The recommendations were embodied in a 22-page proposed bill. Dean Acheson, a Washington lawyer who has just been nominated to the Assistant Secretary of State, was chairman of the committee, which was appointed in February 1939 by Justice Frank Murphy, then Attorney General, at the request of Mr. Roosevelt. New York, January 24th. There is a saying that tiny Bermuda, tucked away in the vastness of the Atlantic, is like a cat because it always lands on its feet. So it is today. When the war started, Bermuda's one big business, the tourist trade, almost completely evaporated. Then the Coral Island colony began to make money on the war. When this correspondent visited the islands recently, Bermuda was very much back on its feet and had bright prospects for the immediate future. For the distant future, Bermudians are frankly worried. They are afraid the 6,000 Americans who will be quartered there at the new hemispheric defense base may rub some of the old world quaintness which lures travelers and honeymooners to this British colony in peacetime. According to reports of the Bermuda Trade Development Board, the tourist industry accounted for 80% of the colony's income before the war, and 25% of the tourists came from the United States. They came in swarms of 80,000 to 90,000 a year. They dashed from the cruise steamers and clogged the stores, shopping for British tweeds, cashmere sweaters, Scotch whiskey, and French perfumes. They packed the hotels, cafes, bars, bathing beaches, and golf clubs. All in all, the tourist horde used to spend $8 million a year in Bermuda. That's a lot of money to spread around in a country of only 19 square miles in area. Now the traffic in tourists is virtually nil. The Bermudians are worried because the last war ended in 1918, and it wasn't until 1927 that pre-World War figures for tourists were reached. A shortage of ships accounted for the slow recovery. Bermuda's history is one of ups and downs. The land was discovered by the Spanish explorer Juan de Bermudez in 1511, shunned as the habitat of devils for a century, and then the English began to settle there in 1609 after a shipwreck of colonists bound for Virginia. Indianapolis, Indiana, January 24th. The Allison Engineering Division of General Motors Corporation announced tonight it has designed an airplane engine for production here that would develop 2,000 horsepower. Engineers said it is a 24-cylinder X-type liquid-cooled motor and expressed a belief that no airplane or propeller now being produced is strong enough for it. The engine is being developed from Allison's 1,000 horsepower V12 motor, for which the division holds a $235 million in contracts. An airline pilot recently was reported to have dived a plane powered with one of the 1,000 horsepower motors at 650 miles an hour near Buffalo, New York. Washington, D.C., January 24th. The House approved a $350 million emergency merchant ship construction program today after stormy debate over a proposal to forbid closed shop agreements with workers employed on the project. 200 cargo vessels will be built. The proposal was offered by Representative Howard W. Smith, Democrat, Virginia, as an amendment to the bill appropriating funds for the measure, but it was defeated through substitution of a prohibition against employment of ship workers who advocate overthrow of the government by force. Representative Everett M. Dirksen, Republican, Illinois, urged immediate action to eliminate communistic influence in the merchant marine, saying, "If we don't clean house, we may have a paralyzing problem on our hands." He characterized Joe Curran, president of the National Maritime Union, as a stooge for the subversive communist element. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, January 24th. Because of an apparent shortage of skilled labor, the 23,000 civilian employees at the Navy Yard will go on a 60-hour week January 27th, receiving time and a half overtime raises for all hours worked over 40. While yard officials completed arrangements for the new working periods, private contractors at work on the nation's largest dry dock plan to speed construction of super dreadnoughts tried to arrange a settlement of a dispute which caused 60 structural steel workers to walk off the job yesterday. Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, January 24th. Work was interrupted today in 3 departments of the Bethlehem Steel Company's big plant here. A company official said 300 men went on a sit-down strike at the Bullet Yard, Bridge Shops, and Tool Steel Department. Howard T. Curtis of the CIO Steelworkers Organizing Committee said workers staged a demonstration and that as a result, about 5,000 were thrown out of the plant. The company, which holds millions of dollars of defense contracts, was reported operating normally tonight. It was denied that any workers were ejected. Curtis said the plant employs about 6,000 men on each of 3 shifts and that 3,000 reported for work on the night shift. The present law prescribing time and one-half pay for overtime work is undermining preparedness efforts far more than it is generally realized and must be given prompt consideration, the National Policy Council of the Chamber of Commerce of the United States said yesterday. The council stated its position in its report on priorities, labor, and monetary policies to the board of directors. The report was accepted and ordered, published, and distributed by the directors meeting in Chicago yesterday. Longer working hours at a lower penalty for overtime are required by reason of the shortage of skilled labor if production goals are to be reached with reasonable economy, the report said. The Policy Council stated its position on priorities as follows. Where priorities are necessary, they should be established upon a basis of voluntary agreement in order that the best interest of defense requirements and of the normal needs of the country may be served. The report disclosed the rising dissatisfaction with existing labor legislation and plant shutdowns in defense industries. A process of voluntary adjustment of labor problems aided necessary by conciliation is greatly preferable to existing labor laws or anti-strike or lockout legislation, it said. The council came out in favor in part of the recommendations made recently by the Federal Reserve Board. Wilmington, Delaware, January 24th. 2 women were injured, one seriously, today when a crowd of 250 men and women stormed a truck as the driver attempted to drive through a picket line in front of the Amalgamated Leather Company plant where a strike is in progress. Mrs. Nellie Garak, 48, who was accidentally thrown in front of the truck by the surging crowd, was in serious condition. Mrs. Annie Churkowski, age 51, the second victim, was discharged after treatment for abrasions of the forehead, right thigh, left ankle, and chest. Police said that at least a dozen strikers sustained less serious injuries. Berlin, January 24th. The informed commentary Dienst Deutschland, commenting on the sentencing of 2 American sailors responsible for the San Francisco Nazi flag affair, observed today that it is evident that therewith the incident is considered closed so far as Germany is concerned. The sailors who ripped the swastika from its staff at the German consulate in San Francisco last Saturday were given suspended sentences of 90 days Thursday and turned over to the Navy, which promised they would be adequately dealt with. New York, January 24th. A storm-tossed passenger ship returned today from a 12-day cruise to Caribbean ports a short time after a transatlantic liner radioed that she also had encountered a storm and would arrive 2 days late. Battered by mountainous waves that smashed 2 of her lifeboats, damaged 5 others, and injured 11 passengers and crewmen, the Grace liner Santa Rosa reached port a day behind schedule after a layover at Bermuda for repairs and supplies. Captain Kurt Zastro said the storm struck his vessel January 11th and lasted 44 hours. Originally due here Monday with 347 passengers from Lisbon, the American export liner Siboney radioed that she had been delayed by heavy seas that swept over the ship and into the passenger quarters on A deck. The 23-year-old 6,938-ton Siboney ran into heavy weather 4 days ago. Her war refugee passengers include 90 destitute Americans returning from Europe with the aid of the State Department. New York, January 24th. James C. Petrillo, president of the American Federation of Musicians, AFL, today won a victory over the American Guild of Musical Artists Incorporated when the appellate division of the Supreme Court unanimously dismissed a guild action which would have restrained him from carrying out a threat to bar from concert halls, radio studios, and motion picture theaters instrumentalists who refused to join his union. Washington, D.C., January 24th. President Roosevelt today proclaimed the United States ratification of the North American Regional Broadcasting Agreement signed in Havana in 1937 by Cuba, Canada, Haiti, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, and the United States. Under the agreement, effective on March 29th, the broadcasting band would be divided between the 6 countries to eliminate international radio interference. The agreement is for 5 years but may be denounced by any country after expiration of 1 year. Trenton, New Jersey, January 24th. Justice Thomas W. Trenchard, 77 years old, New Jersey Supreme Court jurist who sentenced Bruno Richard Hauptmann to the electric chair, retired today. In ill health for several years, the white-haired justice said, "I figured I'm entitled to a rest now." He had been appointed to the court in 1906. And now back to local and regional news. Nearly 500 officers and men of the 113th Engineers, Indiana National Guard departed from Gary at 2:30 a.m. today for Camp Shelby, Hattiesburg, Mississippi for a year's military training. The regiment, part of the 37th Cyclone Division, is made up of 5 companies from Gary, 2 from Whiting, and 2 from South Bend. Colonel John Ward Wheeler of Crown Point is in command. The companies are below peace strength and are to be built up through the addition of draftees. Indianapolis, Indiana, January 24th. The Executive Committee of the American Legion Women's Auxiliary meeting at national headquarters today authorized organization of the auxiliary's 500,000 members for emergency defense service. The women will register for voluntary service on March 15th, anniversary of the founding of the Legion, and will work with Legionnaires scheduled to register on Washington's birthday and with the Red Cross, said Mrs. Louis J. Lemonstra of Clinton, Indiana, national president. The women will answer questions upon registering as to their availability for automobile driving, entertainment, canteen work, social service, nursing and first aid, sewing, and office, household, and administrative work. Girls will be listed for messenger and guide service. Washington, D.C., January 24th. Despite numerous protests, the War Department today changed the name of Camp PA near Tullahoma, Tennessee, where the 33rd Division of the Illinois will train, to Camp Forrest after General Nathan Bedford Forrest, Confederate cavalry leader in the Civil War. Major General Samuel T. Lawton, commander of the Illinois Division, had informed Tennessee officials that naming the camp after General Forrest would be distasteful to large numbers of Illinois citizens. Many others also protested against the name. Although General Forrest was regarded as an able commander, he was charged with needless slaughter of Negro soldiers, and in civil life he was a slave trader. He was famed for his advice that the way to win battles was to get thar fustus with the mostest men. The post, which previously was a Tennessee National Guard camp, had been named for Austin Peay, Tennessee governor in 1924 to 28. Chicago will be the site of a big aircraft engine factory to be constructed by the Buick division of the General Motors Corporation, it was learned yesterday. The War Department announced earlier this month that Buick would build an airplane factory costing approximately $25 million and employing 10,000 persons. One site under consideration for the factory is a 140-acre tract at the northeast corner of North Avenue and LaGrange Road near Franklin Park. The tract is served by the Indiana Harbor Belt Railway. Other properties which Buick has considered include a large tract near the Electromotive Corporation, another General Motors division near LaGrange. The City Council Finance Committee recommended yesterday that the city pay its share of municipal employees' pensions for all workers who enter the country's armed forces and that the pension and seniority rights of these employees be preserved. The committee asked the council to ask the legislature for power to take such action. An opera singer who appeared before Hitler in Berlin a year ago was among 165 draftees inducted into the Army yesterday at the reception center in the 122nd Field Artillery Armory, 234 East Chicago Avenue. He is Robert Geese, 31 years old, 616 North Rush Street. Geese, a baritone, returned from Europe last June after singing in 53 operas in Berlin last winter. Many of these operas, he said, were attended by Hitler and his aides. Geese is a volunteer from local Draft Board 142. He said yesterday that he had a contract to sing with the Chicago Opera Company next year and wants to finish his military service before then. Washington, D.C., January 24th. Newly elected Illinois Republicans were given places on several important House committees by approval of the members today. The Prairie State, with 16 Republican representatives to 11 Democrats, has taken the lead as the strongest minority party state in the chamber. Charles S. Dewey of the 9th District was awarded a place on the Banking and Currency Committee, a spot to which he is fitted by his experience as a former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury and as a former financial advisor to foreign governments. William G. Stratton, Representative at Large, was placed on the Civil Service and Flood Control Committees. C.W. Runt Bishop, 25th District, was placed on the Census, Mines and Mining, and Public Buildings and Grounds Committees. Evan Howell, 21st District, was placed on the Education and Pensions Committees. Stephen A. Day, Representative at Large, was placed on Labor Revision and of the Laws and Elections Committees. James V. Heininger, 24th District, was placed on the Elections, Patents, and Territories Committees. George A. Paddock, 10th District, was placed on the Interstate and Foreign Commerce Committee. Indianapolis, Indiana, January 24th. The Indiana State Senate today named 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats as a committee to sit with a similar group from the House to hear evidence in a contest of the election of Governor Henry F. Schricker, a Democrat, over Republican Glenn R. Hillis. Senator William E. Jenner, Republican floor leader, explained to the legislators immediately upon assembling for today's session the nature of the election protest filed with the General Assembly by former Judge Virgil E. Whitaker of Hammond. The complaint charged that hundreds of aliens voted in the gubernatorial balloting last November 5th, in which Schricker won by the narrow margin of 3,963 votes. It asserted that these irregularities warrant a recount and the installation of Hillis as chief executive. Acting in accordance with a previous agreement, Jenner then nominated 5 Republican senators and 2 Democratic members. The Senate accepted the nominations by voice vote as provided in the Constitution. Jefferson City, Missouri, January 24th. County officials reluctant to surrender their November ballots tossed an unexpected stumbling block in the path of the legislature's Donald McDaniel governorship vote recount today. But Democrats stuck to their decision to open at least one box Monday, deadline for the start of an investigation of Forrest C. Donnell's 3,613 vote majority over Lawrence McDaniel. Officials in scattered counties, Butler, Callaway, Morgan, and Jasper, said they would not permit the removal of their ballots from county limits without a court order. Morgan County Sheriff was instructed to use whatever resistance necessary to guard the ballots. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, January 24th. Shutdown of the $2 million power plant at the Alice Chalmers Manufacturing Company, where production activities have been paralyzed by a CIO strike, was threatened tonight as a result of a dispute between AFL and CIO leaders. The day was also marked by a noisy demonstration of CIO strikers at a meeting called by the AFL, Milwaukee Federal Trades Council. Previous to the meeting, the Wisconsin State Federation of Labor sent out about 1,500 letters inviting company employees to join the AFL, which maintains some unions at the plant. Plant production activities, including $26 million in defense orders, continued at a standstill for the third day. A threat to stop the delivery of milk to Chicago if the city council passes a proposed ordinance providing a milk inspection fee was voted yesterday by McHenry County dairy farmers in Woodstock. The threat, tantamount to a strike warning, was the strongest position yet taken by farmers in the Chicago milk shed. Protests from all directions have been filed with the city council. Last week, the Wisconsin legislature in Madison protested the proposal. The proposed ordinance sets up the following schedule of fees for each 100 pounds of milk, 46.5 quarts, produced. Dairy farms 1 1/4 cents, country receiving plants 1/4 cent, and city pasteurization plants 1/2 cent. Thomas Ralph Page, who embezzled $6,500 from the First National Bank of Dolton, was sentenced to 2 years in a federal penitentiary yesterday by federal judge Philip L. Sullivan. Page, who is 40 years old and a bachelor, was a teller in the bank. On January 3rd, he walked into the state's attorney's office and confessed his peculations. He said he had lost the money in crap games. William Tensig, 21 years old, 5007 Dorchester Avenue, employed as a student poll watcher in the general election of 1938, testified yesterday that Lawrence Rasmussen, Democratic precinct captain in the 15th precinct of the 1st Ward, marked ballots, assisted voters, and instructed the judges to make it 2-1 for the Democrats, and tried to bribe him and another watcher with $5 bills. Rasmussen, a former deputy coroner, and John Franklin, assistant precinct captain, are on trial before Judge Stanley Klarkowski and a criminal court jury on a charge of conspiracy to commit vote frauds. Tensing said he refused Rasmussen's bribe offer, but that later, when they shook hands, he found $5 in his palm. Tensig said that when Rasmussen refused to take back the $5, he turned the bill over to the election commissioners after noting its serial number. Sheriff Emmett L. Say of San Bernardino County, California, notified Cook County authorities yesterday that he will arrive in Chicago Monday to return an alimony row prisoner to California to face a 16-year-old murder charge. The prisoner is Harold Kirk, 45 years old, who was sent to jail in November on complaint of his divorced wife, Alice of Madison, Wisconsin, who asserted he was $7,000 in arrears on alimony payments. Through fingerprint records, Kirk was found to be wanted in California as the Harry Kirk indicated for the murder of James Wynn, a taxicab driver, in 1924. Kirk has denied he was ever in California and expressed willingness to make the trip. Authorities here said a fugitive warrant will be filed in court for Kirk. Permission for Kirk's release must be obtained from Judge Cornelius J. Harrington, who sent him to jail when he was unable to post a $2,000 bond. Hearing on a motion for a new trial for Hugh Greer Carruthers, ex-convict head of the neological New Logic Foundation, who was convicted of raping a girl 12 years old, was continued yesterday by Judge Joseph A. Graber of the criminal court until January 30th. Carruthers, self-styled ex-priest of the Kumbum Lamasery in Tibet, is at liberty on $20,000 bail. His punishment was fixed by the jury at 10 years. Edward J. Mapes, 50 years old, an ex-convict, was sentenced to 15 years in prison yesterday by Judge Charles D. Gage in the Kane County Circuit Court at Geneva on a charge of rape. He was convicted January 7th by a jury which fixed the punishment. Mapes was accused of having seduced a 14-year-old schoolgirl in Elgin while he was a WPA guard at the school she attended. A terrific explosion last night demolished a 5-room cottage at 2444 West 83rd Street, damaged 3 adjoining residences, and also smashed windows and many others in the neighborhood. Timbers and bricks were flung for half a block in the detonation, which was heard 4 miles around on the south side. No one was injured, although a couple in the house to the east were flung to the floor of their living room by the force of the blast. The cottage, a 1.5-story brick building, was the home of Walter J. Wendy, 34 years old, a city fireman assigned to Rescue Squad 9. Kokomo, Indiana, January 24th. Bobby and Mary Cardwell, 9 and 7 years old, owed their lives today to Roy Rooney, age 42, a bakery employee and a World War veteran. Rooney saw the children struggling in a creek where they were plunged when ice on which they were playing gave way. He broke through the ice, swam to the youngsters, and pulled them to safety. All 3 are suffering from exposure. Mother Mary Richard, provincial of the Sisters of the Holy Family of Nazareth in Des Plaines, received word yesterday from Rome that the first step towards the beatification of Mother Mary Frances Siedliska, founder of the order, had been approved by Congregation of the Sacred Rites at its meeting on December 3rd in the Vatican. Mother Frances was born November 12, 1842, in Raskowa Wola, Poland. In 1885, she came to America in St. Mary's Hospital. 2 high schools and many parochial schools today are the results of her visit to Chicago. She died in the Mother House in Rome, November 24th, 1902. The first step toward beatification consists of the appointment of a vice postulator to promote inquiries in all places outside Rome concerning the candidate. 19 subsequent steps in procedure have to be accomplished before the late Mother Mary Frances becomes entitled to the prefix Blessed Mother Frances. And in sports, Michigan, which finally won its first conference basketball game last Monday night, meets Northwestern's Wildcats, who still are seeking their first Big Ten victory in Evanston High School Gymnasium this evening. Several hundred tickets will be available despite the scant seating capacity, ticket manager Ted Pessour said yesterday. This situation is due to final semester examinations at the university. Chicago, unscheduled in the conference, entertains DePaul's brilliant Blue Demons in the University of Chicago Fieldhouse. The Wolverines probably will start the same 5 men who whipped Minnesota Monday 41-24. Northwestern also will stick to the lineup that held Illinois to a 1-point victory in overtime 42-41, and last Monday lost a 4th consecutive Big Ten engagement to Iowa. Conference interest, however, is focused tonight on Madison, Wisconsin, where the undefeated Ohio State Buckeyes meet Wisconsin. The Badgers lost their opening game to Minnesota and since then have defeated Iowa, Purdue, Chicago, and Michigan. In Gene England, Wisconsin has the leading scorer in the conference. Although he has had needed 5 games to score 61 points, Dick Fisher of Ohio State has marked up 38 points in 3 games, which gives him a slight advantage in points per game over England. Jack McLean, who has scored 33 points in Ohio's 3 games, backs up Fisher in the Buckeyes' attack, which many have compared to the fire department basketball played by Purdue and Indiana. If Ohio State can get by Wisconsin, it appears likely the 2-game series with Indiana will decide the 1941 championship. England is the bellwether of the Badger attack. In the only game Wisconsin lost, England scored only 4 points. Indications yesterday pointed to a sellout of 13,000 for the Ohio State-Wisconsin game, with a crowd of 12,500 assured on the basis of advanced sales. The Fieldhouse record is 13,003 at the Purdue game in 1938. While Northwestern's record of 4 defeats leaves it in last place in the conference, tied with Chicago, which has lost 3 games, the Wildcats have met 4 of the 5 first division teams. The conference leaders, Ohio State and Indiana, won victories over Northwestern on their home courts in the space of 3 days. Iowa also was played in Iowa City, so that last week's battle with Illinois probably is a better gauge of what the Wildcats may do this evening against Michigan. Except for Jim Mander, Michigan's 6'4" center, the Wildcats will have superior height. They must cope with clever ball handling by Mike Sofiak and Mel Cummin, and a flaming team spirit that carried Michigan to victory over Minneapolis at the favorite. Harry Klassen, who leads Northwestern scorers with 43 points, will pair with George Benson at forward. Don Clausen will be at center. Clausen has scored 29 points in 4 games. Captain Al Botharis and Russ Wendland, guards, complete the starting lineup. Captain Joe Stampf, who has scored 41 points in 3 games, will attempt to spur his Maroon colleagues to better passing and shooting tonight against DePaul. The Blue Demons, however, are expected to repeat last year's victory. Elmer Gaynor, DePaul's tall center, is expected to lead the Demons' attack. Jim Comiskey and Don Wozni probably will be the starting forwards, with Edwin Sachs and Bernie Wexler at guard. Besides Stampf, the Maroons are planning to start Edgar Nelson and Jack Fonz at forward, and Chuck Wagensberg and George Krakawa at guard. The Chicago Blackhawks' 3-1 victory over the New York Americans Thursday night earned them no rest, for they went through the hardest workout since training camp days yesterday on orders of manager Paul Thompson. The Hawks, who meet the Rangers tomorrow, will draw another 90-minute practice session today. Manager Thompson hopes the extra work will pay dividends in a victory tomorrow, for the Rangers trail the Hawks by only half a game. Detroit, Michigan, January 24th. The Detroit Red Wings defeated the New York Americans 4-2 tonight, counting twice in a bitterly fought overtime period and moving into second place in the National Hockey League standings. A crowd of 5,625 saw the Red Wings put on a storybook finish that began with a 105-foot shot by Eddie Wares, who whipped the puck into the net from a point just past the center circle. Then, almost before the applause had subsided, Sid Howe streaked down the ice and fired a whistler from the left side that also got past goalie Earl Robertson. Detroit players bitterly criticized the ruling by referee Frank Clancy that gave the Americans a penalty shot, which tied things up in the second. They argued for several minutes after Clancy held that goalie John Mowers unintentionally batted the puck into the stands in making a save. Charlie Conacher cashed in on the penalty and forced the game into overtime. James J. Dykes, manager of the White Sox, wired the Chicago office yesterday that he will positively make a Chicago appearance next Monday. He will arrive from his Philadelphia home at 8:30 o'clock Monday morning and will depart for Los Angeles that evening at 6:15 o'clock. Between times, he will be available for queries, wisecracks, and forecasts on the team to beat in the 1941 American League race. Although Jim is down on the new White Sox roster as an active player, it is not believed that he anticipates going into training before the first squad arrives in Pasadena on February 23rd. He may, in the meantime, play a little golf and watch the Beasties at Santa Anita. The White Sox skipper never bets on races, but is a great lover of horseflesh as such. Dykes formerly made the trip from east to west via boat, but abandoned the cruise this winter. His favorite vessel would have been exclusively in neutral waters, but some of those miles break away from their anchorage, and no one can tell where they may float, Mr. Dykes has heard. At the Cub office, it was said things were virtually at a standstill as a result of the absence from the city of General Manager James T. Gallagher. Also, there was no word from the coast that Lou Novikov had been called off his job as an oil well driller. It was said that the Cubs are mindful that their $100,000 chattel would depreciate greatly in value were he to lose a couple of thumbs or even one thumb, and that they would be willing to yield to a light touch to cover Lou's winter groceries if he would quit his job in the Long Beach oil fields. The Washington Senators yesterday became the fourth Major League Ball club to circulate its 1941 roster. The publication shows no new Latin Americans, but does list two carryovers from other lands. Alejandro Carrasquel from Caracas, Venezuela, and Rene Montenegro of Santa Clara, Cuba. Most painful entry on the Washington list to the White Sox was that of Emo Leonard of Auburn, Illinois. Leonard won 14 games last year, most of them from the Sox. Cleveland, Ohio, January 24th. The Plain Dealer says it learned from an unimpeachable source that pitcher Bob Feller of the Cleveland Indians will receive $45,000 for the 1941 season. The figure is for pitching only, the newspaper says, and exclusive of income from testimonials and other sources reckon to bring the Fireball pitcher at least another $10,000. Feller signed his 1941 contract Tuesday, but club officials maintained customary silence about the figure except to say that it made him the highest paid pitcher in baseball history. Sports writers estimated he would get at least $30,000. The claim of the highest-priced pitcher opened a feud between the Indians and Detroit Tigers, with Walter O. Briggs, owner of the Tigers, asserting pitcher Buck Newsom received $30,000 last season and would get at least $35,000 this year. Saturday night is movie night. Let's see what is playing at the downtown Chicago movie theaters. At the Chicago, here's your top show. Fred Astaire, Paulette Goddard, and Boris Morrow's Second Chorus. Paramount's romantical musical with Artie Shaw and his band. And on stage, complete, Clifford C. Fisher's Follies Bergère. 53 entertainers, 32 Parisian beauties, and 10 exotic scenes. At the Oriental, Randolph near State Street, on stage, a star-studded show, Mitzi Green, delightful young star, Larry Adler, Harmony's wizard, Peggy Bernier, favorite comedian, Milton Watson, romantic singer, Bob Zerke, Don and Jane Ford, and many others. And on the screen in its first showing, Ralph Bellamy in Ellery Queen, Master Detective, starring Margaret Lindsay. And at the State Lake, Heat Wave hits the loop. In person, it's Cab Calloway and his orchestra, plus all-new Cotton Club review of 1941, singers, dancers, comics, and extra community singing. And on the screen in its first loop run, Thompson Entertainment, Gal Gag Glamour-filled, A Night at Earl Carroll's, Paramount's Romance, starring Ken Murray, Lillian Cornell, J. Carroll Nash, and Brenda Ann Corbina. And at the RKO Palace, Randolph Atlas South Streets, fourth week, biggest hit in years, Christopher Morley's Natural History of a Woman, Ginger Rogers as Kitty Foyle with Dennis Morgan, and it's an RKO Radio Triumph. Also a true confession from a career girl whose confessions are well worth hearing. Plus, mystery thrills with The Saint in Palm Springs, starring George Sanders and Wendy Berry. And at the Garrick, Randolph and Dearborn Streets, in its third week, it's Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland in Santa Fe Trails with Raymond Massey and Ronald Reagan, plus the latest world news events. At the United Artists, Randolph near State Street, a new kind of triangle tries a new angle. It's Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn, Jane Stewart in The Philadelphia Story, MGM smash hit with Ruth Hussey and John Howard, plus a screen scoop with the new March of Time, uncensored exclusive, and the late news. At the Apollo, Randolph at Clark Street, it's Clark Gable and Hedy Lamarr in Comrade X with the late news. At the Roosevelt, it's the Mighty Muni in his mightiest role, Paul Muni in Hudson's Bay with Gene Tierney, and an extra, Willie Hop and the news. At the McVickers, Madison near State Street, it's two hits. Randolph at Clark Street, it's Clark Gable and Hedy Lamarr in Comrade X with the late news. At the Roosevelt, it's the Mighty Muni in his mightiest role, Paul Muni in Hudson's Bay with Gene Tierney, and an extra, Willie Hop and the news. At the McVickers, Madison near State Street, it's two hits. Norma Shearer, Robert Taylor in Escape with Conrad Veidt, and Judy Garland in Little Nellie Kelly with George Murphy. At the LaSalle, today only advanced showings. It's at Madison at Clark Street, Sky Murder with Walter Pidgeon and Donald Meek, and Behind the News with Lloyd Nolan. At the studio, Van Buren at Michigan, 2 musical films, English titles, today, tomorrow, 2 days only, Gypsies and Beethoven Concerto, Monday and Tuesday, 2 days only, Chapayev and Potemkin, Wednesday, 1 day only, The 13 and Soviet Border, next Thursday through Friday, 2 days only, Peter the First and Baltic Deputy, At the Monroe, First Run Newsreels, and Leo Carrillo and Louise Platt and Kenneth Roberts in Captain Caution, and So You Won't Talk with Joey Brown. At the Clark, it's James Cagney and Ann Sheridan in City for Conquest, and Alan Jones in A Night in the Tropics. At the Woods, Randolph at Dearborn Streets, it's Madeline Carroll, Peter Lorre, and Robert Young in Secret Agent, and Claudette Colbert and James Stewart in It's a Wonderful World. At the Telenews, the Newsreel Theater stayed at Randolph Street, the most interesting show in Chicago, 1-hour program, news and shorts. And finally, at the World Playhouse, 410 South Michigan Avenue near Van Buren. And its second week starts today. It's Rex Harrison and Margaret Lockwood. Thrilled to a nonstop sensation of romance and excitement. It's Night Train, a 20th Century Fox production, acclaimed by all critics as one of the year's 10 best. Fast-moving and very exciting, tangy with the condiments of romance and suspense. And those are the films playing in Chicago tonight, Saturday, January 25th, 1941. And that is the news. Henry Chopp reporting, as read from the Chicago Tribune. Have a swell day.